Welcome to the chalkboard, my fellow football nerds, for episode number 163 of Chalk Talk. I'm your host, Shane Haff, and you can follow me on Twitter and YouTube at ShaneHaffNFL. And I am joined today by the best co-host in the game. You've heard him on the Tough Cover radio show. It is Mark Henry Jr. Give him a follow on Twitter at MarkHenryJr_. Mark, how are you doing, man? It's been a long time.
It's been too long. I got married, went on a honeymoon, went to like 2 bachelor parties and a wedding. It's been an insane month for me over here. So much so I can't find my glasses right now. So for anyone watching on the YouTube, no, I didn't get, no, I can't see magically now. I still wear glasses. But I always say this. This is a dumb joke to lead off the pod. The irony of not being able to find your glasses is that the glasses would help you find your glasses, but you can't see. But
that is very true. So we'll take up a collection at the end of the show to send somebody over to help Mark find his glasses.
Yeah, I'm without sight.
It's been a while since we've done a show. The Chalk Talk feed went dark because Mark went and got married, went on the honeymoon, and now we're getting back into it as training camps are opening. We're going to run through our typical 4 weeks of divisional previews, but we do need to welcome in a new audience today. If you're watching live, you'll notice up in the top right hand corner of the screen we have the Eagles Pin Pull Network logo, and the Eagles Pin Pull Network is a new network that I'm running that's going to feature 6 weekly shows once we get to the regular season, and Chalk Talk will be one of them. So if you're a longtime Chalk Talk listener, you know what the deal is. You know where to find us. You need to go check out the Eagles Pin Pull Network because that's where these episodes are going to start posting on podcasting platforms. So make sure you subscribe. If you are a Pin Pull Network listener, you've never heard of Chalk Talk, this is our 163rd episode. We've been around for I think this is going into our 4th full season now. And what Mark and I have typically done is each Tuesday, we've gone through a rundown of each game from the NFL slate to catch Eagles fans up on all the other action. And that's similar to what we're going to do. We're going to alter the format a little bit because we're going to be a Monday show for the most part now. And we're going to specifically focus on the other teams in the NFC East, the Cowboys, the Giants, the Commanders, maybe pick a game or two of the week, some other relevant NFC games. But we're really going to start to hone in on supplying Eagles fans with what they need to know about the top competition around the division and around the league. And so we're going to kick that off today by going through an NFC East and NFC North preview. And each of the next 3 weeks, we'll tackle 2 more divisions to give you a full recap and preview of each team in the NFL. And then we'll really get into the meat and bones of the season as we get there. So we're going to start off. Mark, do you want to start off with the NFC East or the NFC North today?
Let's go with the East. Let's start it off there.
Okay, so we'll start with the NFC East. We're going to run through how each team fared last season, some of their key losses and additions from the offseason, some big questions heading into the season, and we'll talk strength of schedule and over-under predictions. Now, for strength of schedule, there's some different methodologies to use with strength of schedule, and I prefer Warren Sharp's model that takes into account rest disadvantages and over-under win totals rather than previous year's wins. I think it's a more valuable metric. I mean, you look at a team like the Vikings last year who lost Kirk Cousins. Like, clearly, they're probably not going to be as good of a team this year, but the traditional method doesn't capture that. And so if you look at last season using his metrics, of the 15 teams that had the easiest schedules preseason, 11 of those teams had winning records, while only 5 of the teams with the 15 hardest schedules did. So I do think it's a valuable metric. If you hear me reference strength of schedule and it doesn't match with what you've seen, that's why. So you can dig into that more for yourself. Just Google strength of schedule Warren Sharp and you can find it. So let's start out with the team that won the East last year, and it is the Dallas Cowboys. Last season, Dallas went 12-5. They won the NFC East before losing a wild card weekend game to the Green Bay Packers 48-32. And heading into the offseason, there was a lot of talk about the Cowboys being all in this season, and it really didn't play out that way as you went through free agency. And you saw them lose a lot of key players. They lost Dorrance Armstrong, they lost Tyler Biotish, Neville Gallimore, Michael Gallup, Jonathan Hankins, Tony Pollard, and Tyron Smith. And when you look at that, this is a team that lost 2 starting offensive linemen, They lost 2 pass rushers who combined for nearly 700 snaps last season. And they lost their starting running back while they added virtually nothing. I mean, they brought back Ezekiel Elliott coming off a career bad year. They went and got Eric Kendricks. And then everything else was through the draft. Tyler Guyton, Marshawn Nealon, Cooper Beebe. And in the middle of all that, you have the Dak Prescott contract situation looming. He's playing out the final year of a deal, and he has a no tag and no trade clause. So, I mean, if I'm Dak's agent, I'm telling him we're not signing anything. You're going to hit open free agency. And that's what you're thinking. They've got Micah Parsons' contract on the horizon. They have CeeDee Lamb unhappy with his contract. So there's a lot of question marks there heading into the season. But for me, Mark, as I tried to condense it down into a biggest question or two, my first big question for the Cowboys is, can Mike Zimmer keep this defense humming? They lose Dan Quinn. Dan Quinn's done a fantastic job with that defense. We'll talk more about him momentarily with Washington. But you bring in a guy in Mike Zimmer, you lose a lot of pieces, and you need the defense to be able to step up and play the way that they have over the last couple years under Dan Quinn. Do you think the defense is up to the challenge in 2024?
No, I don't. I don't think they're going to be quite as good. You listed the impact players that they lost, but yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with the big question, because bigger than any of the names that they lost, I think personnel wise, is Dan Quinn. I think it's the biggest loss that they had this offseason, and I have my own thoughts on what Dan Quinn is as a head coach, but I think undoubtedly Dan Quinn is a great defensive coordinator, and I think that they lost kind of that. I thought last year could potentially be a rough one for Dallas with the loss of Kellen Moore, and Mike McCarthy stepped up into that role and did a fine job. They ran the ball less. Their run game was less efficient, but their pass game was even more efficient. CeeDee Lamb leveled up. Dak had an even better season. I thought, Mike McCarthy was a little bit of a coordinator merchant before that, and he was able to prove that he was able to keep the offense humming. I don't think that they're going to be able to keep the defense humming along the same way, especially inputting a whole new defensive coordinator with a different ideology. I just don't think Mike Zimmer and Dan Quinn are comparable necessarily to what they want to do with the defense. It feels like they're going to have a lot of differences to what they're going to have to change, and a lot of the same pieces. So yeah, they went all in. It's the same team minus players. Like, who are their big ads again? You mentioned the draft guys, but besides the draft,
Ezekiel Elliott.
Yeah, they brought Zeke back. Who was it?
Eric Kendricks.
Yeah. There really is nothing to be excited about. And, I talked about it on my radio show. The reason CeeDee Lamb is good. Sorry to make this fantasy corner. This is for new listeners. I do this thing where I reference fantasy football and then Shane starts to roll his eyes over there. But CeeDee Lamb is going second overall in fantasy drafts this year as the number one wide receiver in fantasy drafts. And people look at that, and I've heard a lot of people be like, wow, he's going above Tyreek Hill or Justin Jefferson or whoever you want to throw out there. And the reason is, it's not necessarily that he's better than those guys. It's that those guys have other receivers or weapons in their offense. The Dallas Cowboys offense is entirely the CeeDee Lamb show. Brandon Cooks is a joke as a number 2 wide receiver. They don't have anything at running back that tells you that they're going to command a lot of targets out of the backfield. Jake Ferguson is like such a league average tight end. I just not a lot there in Dallas offensively, weapon wise, to get excited about besides CeeDee Lamb. And yeah, they've lost so much talent. They lost the defensive coordinator. They didn't add anything exciting. I think this is a team that falls out of the playoffs. And I know that sounds crazy, and their over under is, did you say 9.5, 10.5? Yeah. That's an under that I'm really interested in.
Yeah, you mentioned fantasy football. We do have Mr. Crockpot in the chat asking for some of your favorite dynasty players from the division as we go along. So you can keep that in the back of your mind.
Yeah.
But yeah, you mentioned the offense, and that's the other big question for me is Tyler Guyton was their first-round draft pick, and I'm a big Oklahoma guy. Tyler Guyton was on the Eagles' radar, and he was somebody I was vocally on the record about not wanting the Eagles to draft. And it's not because I don't like Tyler Guyton. It's because I think he's pretty raw. Mm-hmm. And it felt like for the Eagles to draft him, people were talking about you play him at right guard, and then he takes over for Lane at right tackle. And he's just barely learning how to play right tackle. And that's why I didn't like that idea for the Eagles. Well, in Dallas, he's going to be asked to step in and switch to left tackle, which he hasn't done before. and he does it without the benefit of Jeff Stoutland. So I've got concerns about their offensive line as well. When you look at the strength of schedule metrics, they have the 22nd easiest schedule, so it's a more difficult than average schedule. I've got them under 10.5. I think they're going to be like a fringe wild card team because we're going to get into the NFC North and where I think a lot of these playoff teams are going to come from. I'm not going to say they'll miss the playoffs, but I do think that they do not win the NFC East, and I think they're a fringe wild card team when it's all said and done.
Yeah, I'd be shocked, honestly, if me and Shane don't have, I'd say, the same 6 playoff teams. And then I think my 7th one will shock Shane when we get to that NFC division next week. But Dallas just misses out for me. I have them at 8 and 9. And I feel, and we're going to talk about this when we get to the Cowboys, the Eagles, the 49ers, but I feel like everyone is assigning this looming doom to the Eagles. And we're talking about Bill Belichick taking over in 2025 in a year that the team has a 10.5 win total. Like, it's crazy to me, some of the conversations that are happening preseason about the Eagles. And I get it. They had a historic collapse, and that's going to force uncomfortable conversations and maybe even stupid conversations. But I think a lot of the impending doom that I think people are labeling the Eagles to potentially have this offseason, like how many articles are Nick Wright going on TV? Like, how many people like that have you seen be like, my hot take is I think the Eagles are going to take a step back this year. And it's like, so many people are doing that. The teams I'd look at doing that are Dallas and San Francisco. All these impending issues with Dak's contract and when are they going to pay Parsons, and San Fran has all those Ayuk's up for wanting to trade. Trent Williams wants a new contract, but no one's saying this about Dallas and San Fran. No one's worried about them falling apart. Whereas my bold prediction, I guess, I already said Dallas missing the playoffs. One of Dallas or San Fran has the season from hell. That's my bold prediction.
All right. Well, there you go. Mr. Crockpot says he has a weird feeling that Washington and Dallas have the same win total in 2024, somewhere around 7 or 8 wins. And so
I like that.
We'll talk about Washington here in a minute, but you mentioned the Eagles. Let's go ahead and talk about the Eagles. They finished second in the division last year with an 11-6 record. Of course, have the historic late season collapse that culminates in a 32-9 loss on Wild Card weekend to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This offseason, they lose Kevin Byard, who they traded for midseason last year. And then they lose 2 franchise cornerstones to retirement in Fletcher Cox and Jason Kelce. They trade Hassan Reddick to the Jets, and they lost DeAndre Swift. But then they go in free agency, and they add Saquon Barkley, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, Bryce Huff, Devin White, and obviously through the draft, you get Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. So my big question for the Eagles is, can they shake off that late season collapse, and can they start the season strong under not just a new defensive coordinator, but you've got a new offensive coordinator as well. And along with that, because, Vic Fangio, the Eagles have run Fangio-inspired defenses the last few years. Now, I think there's a sizable upgrade here, but it's a similar defense. But is Jalen Hurts up to running the Kellen Moore offense that features under center? It features motion. It puts a lot more stress on a quarterback to make correct pre- and post-snap reads. And there's a lot of positives that come with that offense, but there's no denying that Kellen Moore has worked with 2 extremely cerebral quarterbacks over the last several years in Dak Prescott and Justin Herbert. And so there's going to be a lot on Jalen Hurts played. And so are they going to be able to get up and running and shake off that late season slump? What are your thoughts on the Eagles headed into this season?
It's maybe I'm overconfident. I really do think I am, because I talk to other people, other Eagles fans, other Eagles, bloggers, whatever you want to say, on my radio show, or other people at my radio station. And no, everyone else seems really worried about this season, and they're kind of walking on eggshells. I look at each position group and I'm like, where am I nervous? And I look and I compare these position groups to your contemporaries in the NFC, and I'm asking, who is supposed to be making me terrified that they're way better than us? Because I'm obviously much higher on Jalen Hurts than I think what consensus has become. I think we've seen with some of the pocket passing metrics, especially through the first 11 weeks last year, that I think he's a lot better in the pocket than people give him credit for. And while he will have to make more pre-snap decisions, I also think that there's going to be a lot of simplification done for him, especially in the way of the blocking scheme and making sure that he has somewhat of a blocking scheme in front of him for a blitz. I don't think that it's going to be the same, well, deal with it with your legs and whatever you want to say there. I think that Jalen's going to have a fantastic year. I think that offense is loaded. You have Saquon now, obviously. You have A.J. Brown. You have Devontae. You have Goddard. Something that I thought was really interesting about the Eagles offense, when you look through it, there was a graphic going around on ESPN the other day about the top 10 most expensive offenses in the NFL. The Eagles were not on that list. They were not one of the 10 most expensive offenses in the NFL. And that's with a roster where you have Jalen, who got paid, Saquon, who got paid, AJ got paid, Devontae got paid, Goddard got paid, Mailata got paid, Lane is paid, Dickerson's paid, and then you have the Juergens on a rookie deal and whoever's playing right guard on a cheap deals. But that's just a credit to Howie to building out the offense the way that I don't think any of us are all that nervous. Obviously, there's some adjustments that have to be made, but I think the Saquon addition, the coordinator hire, makes you feel great about the offense. And yet there's Dives is chiming in about things he's worried about on the defense. I wouldn't worry about depth on the defensive tackle. Am I wrong there, Shane? I think you have obviously Jordan Davis, who's hopefully stepping into a run-stuffing role. Everyone knows kind of our debates about Jordan Davis, but I think there's no doubt that he's at least useful in the role that they use him in. You have Jalen Carter, who I think is only going to get better. You have Milton Williams, obviously, but who else? I maybe you're only 3 deep at defensive tackle, but I think as Eagles fans, there's a chance we're a little bit too addicted to rotating defensive linemen. I think a lot of other teams, you watch them and they're not necessarily rotating 8 guys in the way we do and rotating so often at defensive tackle. Maybe that means Jalen Carter's playing more snaps than we think. Maybe it means Milton Williams is playing more snaps than we think. Obviously, I think Davis probably has some limitations to how many snaps he can play, but I wouldn't worry too much about depth at defensive tackle. And yeah, the linebacker group is the group to be worried about, but I guess I just ignore that as an Eagles fan because that's been our entire lives.
Yeah, I mean, they have Moro Ajomo, Milton Williams, but one of my questions was, have the Eagles lost their edge in the trenches? Because you lose Jason Kelce on the offensive side of the ball, and that necessitates your right guard now moving to center, and you've got to plug in a new right guard, and you lose Fletcher Cox, and you lose Hassan Reddick, and so you're projecting Bryce Huff to come in, and so there's certainly some question marks. There's question marks about, did they do enough to address the back 7 of the defense, because all the time rookie cornerbacks come in and struggle, and Darius Slay is a year older. And so I think there's definitely questions, but I think that Eagles fans are very close to the team and don't realize that type of nitpicky questions are all over the NFL. And so yeah. I think they get a little too tunnel visioned on their one team and don't realize over a wide swath of the league, every team has some sort of question marks. And when you look at what the Eagles did this offseason, I like it. I like the early reports out of training camp concerning Jalen Hurts and him processing the offense. And obviously we'll see down the road. But when you look at their schedule, they have the 9th easiest schedule, so a fairly favorable schedule. They finally get into some normal game. No, they don't have 5 Thursday night / Monday night games this year, whatever ridiculousness it was last year. And so their over under is at 10.5. And I've got the over on this one. And I don't think this is a slide over. Like, I think picking 12 wins for this team is pretty reasonable. It's definitely my favorite over under in the division.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't know. Dallas under 10.5 or Eagles over 10.5 is probably close for me. I think they're about the same because I think I have them both 2.5 wins over. I have the Eagles at 13 wins. That could be 12 pretty easily, but yeah, I think they're the best team in the NFC. I think they have the least questions, and like you said, there are questions, but that's every team in the NFL has those types of questions. And I'm more confident in the DBs than I think most people are. I think at the very least, they have a lot of options. They're not lacking of options like I think they have been in years past. There is at least some depth there that you can grasp onto. So that's where I'm kind of relying on. I'd be shocked if both of the rookie DBs didn't make an impact. I think one of them will be able to step in and make an impact, if not at the beginning of the season, throughout the season. So I feel really good about this Eagles team, and I think they're one of the contenders to win the NFC.
All right, a quick comment here from Quentin on YouTube says that he watched Sirianni's presser, said that Hurts is doing very well, which, of course, I'd kind of expect that. I'd take Coach speak with a grain of salt, but we will have Brandon Lee Gouton on the show tomorrow on mine and Johnny's show. He's been at training camp, so we'll get some thoughts from him. So you guys can tune in then when we get a chance to talk to Brandon about what he's seen at practices. But let's keep the ball rolling here. Let's go to the third place team last year, a team that came off of a pretty, I guess now we know fluky, but an impressive 2022 season with Brian Dable, and then really tanked in 2023. It's the New York Giants. They went 6-11, and of course, they went through multiple quarterbacks. Daniel Jones didn't look good, got injured. Tyrod Taylor, you had the Danny DeVito thing, all that
Tommy
stuff.
DeVito.
Oh
Danny DeVito. It's always funny in Philadelphia.
I knew that was wrong when I said it, but then I was like, wait, what was the name? And I couldn't think of it. But
That's
Tommy
great.
DeVito. Yeah, so they have some big losses. Obviously, they lose Darren Waller to retirement. They lose Saquon Barkley to Philadelphia. And they lost Xavier McKinney, who we're going to talk about as a big addition for an NFC North team here in a minute. So they have some big losses. They also went out and made the splashy play, trading for Brian Burns, giving him a massive contract. They also got Jalen Mills in free agency, Devin Singletary, Jermaine Illuminor, and John Runyon. And then in the draft, they got Malik Neighbors and Tyler Nubin. So my big question for the Giants is, are those additions to the support cast, both, Illuminor and Runyon on the offensive line, you've got Malik Neighbors that you bring in. Is that enough to prop up Daniel Jones? Because I think we know what Daniel Jones is at this point, and it's not a quarterback that you should hitch your franchise to, but that's where they are for the next year. And so are they going to be able to do enough? And then, alongside that is, will passing on J.J. McCarthy come back to haunt the Giants? So what are your thoughts about the Giants offense and then about the team as a whole?
I'm starting more than ever to think that you shouldn't draft your quarterback until you have your roster somewhat figured out. We'll talk about it when we get to the AFC East. I'm pretty nervous for Drake May. So I don't think that they'll regret passing on JJ, because I don't think this team's anywhere near ready to take advantage of the QB window that you get when you have a rookie quarterback. But I think they're going to be bad at quarterback this year for sure. I think their best play is probably waiting until next year. And I think they're going to be very bad. I think they're going to have a top 5 pick. And I think they're in the running for worst rosters in the NFL. Now I struggle because I am starting, I predicted them for 3 wins. They're one of the worst teams in the league, in my opinion. I think it's Carolina. I think it's them. I actually think you could make an argument Tennessee is going to be in that conversation this year. But the one thing I struggle with is that they went 6-11 last year with everything that went wrong. And you had Daniel Jones go out. You were playing Tommy DeVito and all that. You had Tyrod. Is Brian Dable just a good enough coach that they are going to win 5 or 6 games and they can't get a top 5 pick? Or is the roster bad enough now that they'll bottom out and maybe cost Dable his job, cost Joe Shane his job? I will say the one thing is, anyone watching anything revolving around this Hard Knocks offseason show involving the Giants, I think feels a lot worse about the Giants organization. Because I wouldn't say it's the most confidence-inspiring stuff from their GM about their quarterback and about everything going on with their team. And they keep saying, could anyone win behind this offensive line? Could anyone do anything with this team? And it's like, that's the team you put together, dude. I don't know. So I think that the Giants are in some serious trouble, at least for the next 1 to 2 years while they get out under this Daniel Jones contract.
Yeah, I don't think the Giants are not in a good spot for sure. However, I still think Brian Dable is a good coach. And I think we saw in 2022 that he was able to get the most out of Daniel Jones, which is still not a quarterback that you want. We're able to run an offense. Now, a big part of that was Saquon Barkley, who is gone now. And also a big part of it was an extremely low depth of target. They did not push the ball downfield. But if Daniel, I do think they're able to eke out over 6.5 wins football team. You get Washington twice. They've got the easiest, but you go and look at the games. I think they can get to 7 wins. I don't season. I think the roster is still bad, but you have coordinators. You get Shane Bowen in the building, which I'm not sure that stops the bleeding, but Dable. I think Brian Dable will be able to do enough to get, which brings me back to the JJ thing, because I don't think they're going to have a top 4 or 5 pick. And so I think they're back in a position of needing to trade a lot to get up if that's what they want to do. So I'm not optimistic about the Giants by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think they'll be good enough to not have that top 3 or 4.
I'd be shocked if they went over 6.5. I really just don't see the talent. But yeah, I get it, because like you said, we saw what they did last year. They got a lot out of nothing. They won 6 games. It felt like that was the worst possible scenario in a lot of ways. But I just look at this roster. I've never been a Devin Singletary guy. It feels like they have 5 of the same wide receiver. I'm not as high on Malik Neighbors as I think a lot of people are, in terms of him stepping in and being like a wide receiver 1 right away on an NFL team. I don't know if I see that. I think he's going to take the top off the defense. I don't know if anyone can get it over the defense, I guess, to Malik Neighbors.
That's fair.
But I think that this is going to be like a frustrating season. The one thing I'm kind of justifying in my head to predict them at 3 wins, even though they won 6 with a bad team last year, is that not every year is the same. I feel like I use that logic a lot, where I'm like, well, if they won 6 last year, then they have to win a certain. That kind of brings me back to the Carolina Panthers from last year. I think I looked at that wrong, because I looked at it the year before and they won 7 games and they traded up for the first pick and they got that quarterback. I was like, wow, this is a rookie quarterback stepping into a 7-win team. But I don't think that was a 7-win team. I think it was fraudulent from a terrible NFC South. They were probably like a 4 or 5-win team who got lucky to win a couple games. So I'm going to try to not get tricked up too much by last year's results and just look at the roster. But I do understand the logic behind it.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. I think there is no chance they contend for like a playoff spot.
Yeah.
I just think they can sort of bounce back and find that middle ground where they're at least a semi-competitive team on a week-to-week basis. So, but yeah, I do not think they have a bright future at this point in time. So let's go on to the next team in the division. It is the Washington Commanders. They finished last season with a 4-13 record, and then they did all kinds of stuff this offseason. They lost a few players: Cody Barton, Jacoby Brissett, Cam Curl. They lost Kendall Fuller and Antonio Gibson, but they went on a spending spree in free agency. They bring in Dorrance Armstrong, Frankie Louvu, Tyler Biotish, Nick Allegretti, Austin Eckler, Bobby Wagner, Jeremy Chin, Cleveland Farrell, Dante Fowler Jr. And then, of course, in the draft, they add Jaden Daniels, Johnny Newton, Mike Sanderstill, and Ben Sinnott. My big question for the Commanders is this. They signed 20 free agents. They spent $160 million. Who's the best player they signed? Like, what did they even accomplish? Are they even a decent team after spending that money? And they had the most cap space. They made a ton of signings. But did they actually get better as a football team? I think that Dan Quinn, I'm doing the first name thing again. I think
Rusty.
Dan Quinn.
Rusty.
Guys need to stop having the same last name. I'm just saying. There's enough names out there. We can be original. Dan Quinn overpaid for guys he was familiar with in Dorrance Armstrong from his time in Dallas, from Dante Fowler Jr. and his time from Atlanta. I think he overpaid for those guys. I think the O-line still is not good. And I think their pass catchers outside of Terry McLaurin aren't very good. And now you're throwing a rookie quarterback into that. And a rookie quarterback who we talked about during the draft process has some issues with being very slight, taking some big hits. Now, I think Jaden Daniels was the wrong pick for them, and we don't have to relitigate that. But I do think his mobility raises your floor.
Yeah.
I just don't think they necessarily have the pieces around him for him to thrive. So they have the 13th easiest schedule. Their over-unders at 6.5. How do you feel about the Commanders heading into this year?
This is one of them that I would never bet because I have him at 7. I have him with just a half over, and it's strictly based off the floor that I think Jaden Daniels gives you. I think I totally agree with you. They made the wrong decision. So here's what I'd say, actually. Let me correct that. They made the wrong decision in the long term from a macro. I think Jaden Daniels, with the way that he that Drake met, I think Washington may have played him, if that makes sense. If they have it, you see it right away. That's kind of playoffs in his first year as a starter. Lamar, you saw it right away, obviously. RG3, he's really good. You're going to see a lot of flashes of that early. Be it second and is the guy who a lot of people think he could be. And there is obviously a lot of physical reasons that you should, but I think that there are some it's hard to imagine him not missing with how slight he is. And then there's also some Justin Fields concerns with the middle of the field. And if he's able to kind of throw the short and intermediate slant routes across the middle of the field, or if he wants to kind of go deep. I know that there were some people saying that he wasn't as impressive in the Giants offseason hard knocks as the other top quarterbacks were when he was going through the place with Dable. Like maybe didn't have quite as good of a grasp of the kind of concepts that they were talking about as Drake May did or as JJ McCarthy did. But I do think his athletic ability gives them a high floor. I'm giving them 7 wins. The biggest concerns here with the Commanders are obviously the secondary. I think that's a bad secondary. It's probably the worst in the league going into the year. I don't know who's the best player in their secondary here. Jartavius Martin, who was he was a rookie last year, second rounder. He had a 65.4 PFF grade. Yeah, I mean, he was the best player according to PFF, I guess, last year. But I mean, Emmanuel Forbes was terrible. Michael Davis is not great and old. Benjamin St. Juice isn't anything special. They're safe last year, but I guess is my concern with this team, and I think that really the teams in the or what finishing between like 6 to 8 wins.
To 8 wins. This is not one I would want to bet. I think you did at 7, but Jaden Daniels gets hurt or he struggles. They've got a guy as a head coach who I don't think is a good head coach. I have concerns for the Commanders.
Could be very good, like if it breaks out the right way, and maybe some of these guys have been underperforming a bit in the Ron Rivera scheme, or I guess I should say the Jack Del Rio scheme, because he was the one calling the plays on defense. But you have Cleveland Farrell, Dorrance Armstrong did grade out fine last year. He was 49th out of 112 defensive ends, so at least he's like a competent guy to plug in there. Deron Payne and Jonathan Allen both graded out as average D tackles last year. I think we both think they're both better than that, right? So
yeah, absolutely.
If they step into being the really solid to very good players that they are, you have Frankie Louvu, Bobby Wagner, Jamin Davis at linebacker. That's at least guys.
They drafted Johnny Newton, who we both liked.
Yeah. I missed Jer'Zhan Newton actually. Yeah, I missed Johnny Newton. That's a good ad. That's a really good ad as well at the defensive tackle position, which they're already rich at. But yeah, I do think the front 7 could be very good. But the question is, can it be good with how bad that secondary is? Does it even matter if the front 7's good? Because I really do think it's the worst secondary in football.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's flip over to our other division that we're talking about today. It's the Detroit Lions who won the division last year. They had on a Super Bowl trip to the San Francisco 48. They beat the Bucs 31-23. Fall to 49. They lose Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, who missed a lot of the season anyways with injury, but they lose him nevertheless. They lose Jonah Jackson, lose Ben Johnson, which is huge for this team. In the offseason, they added Marcus Davenport, Carlton Davis, DJ Reader, Kevin Zeitler, Terrion Arnold, and Ennis Rakestraw Jr. My big question for the Lions is, will the heavy investment into the pass defense pay off? They were ranked 20. It really feels as the season went along, their offense was on fire, and it had to be because the defense was horrendous. Is it going to pay off? Can the defense become average this year? Because if so, and if the offense retains its firepower, they should be right back where they were last season. So they have the 21st easiest strength of schedule. Their over-under is also at 10.5. What do you make of the Lions heading into this season?
10.5 is a number I would not want to bet for sure. I think they're a 10 or 11 win team. Here's what I'd say. The one question that I'll ask about the secondary, and the numbers are bad. How much of that is impacted by being one of the more aggressive passing teams and one of the most high-scoring teams, that you're going down the field so fast, you're getting up in games so fast, a lot of games you're winning and you're up in games? I think some of those numbers are probably impacted by the fact that teams had to throw and teams were behind. So teams were throwing and throwing and throwing. Now, were they really good in the secondary? No. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson was hurt. But Brian Branch had a really good year last year in the secondary for them. Melifonwu finished top 10 among safeties if you look at the PFF grade. So I think some of the issues that they have in the secondary, I don't know if they're necessarily personnel driven, and I do like what they did by going out and getting Terrion Arnold and to a lesser degree Ennis Rakestraw. I wasn't as sold on Rakestraw as a lot of people were. I love Arnold, obviously. But my question is, if some of those problems are not just simply like ideological with how they play offense with the Ben Johnson scheme and with how Aaron Glenn coaches defense, and kind of is aggressive with blitzing and things like that. So that would be my one question, if how much of it is personnel driven and we're just supposed to assume they got the secondary all better and that'll fix their one problem, or if it's a little bit because of how they play.
Yeah, I mean, you can look, there's a bit of a which came first, the chicken or the egg there. Is the offense really good because the defense stinks? Does the defensive numbers look bad because the offense puts up so many points and so fast? If you look at like DVOA, which tries to take out some of that situationality, they were like 23rd in DVOA pass defense last year. So maybe not as bad as some of the other numbers, but still a below average unit. You look at this team this year, and I really don't feel like they lost a lot. Mm-hmm. I mean, losing Chauncey Gardner-Johnson would be big, except for the fact that he didn't really play for them last year. He was injured most of the season. Mm-hmm. You lose Jonah Jackson, but you plug in Kevin Zeitler. And so it feels like they had answers. And obviously keeping Ben Johnson was the biggest thing in this whole deal. For me, it's just seeing the division around them too. Like, it's so hard to be on the cusp and fall short and then get back there. And I remember Dan Campbell talking about that last year. He said he told his players in the locker room, like, we might never be here again, which is not usually what you say in that situation, but that's Dan Campbell, and he's just a little different kind of guy. And the players certainly are bought into his system and believe in him. Ben Johnson's bought in because he came back, because he said he has unfinished business. This division could be a bloodbath, though. You've got the Packers, who are up and coming, that we'll talk about in a minute. You've got the Bears, who are exciting this year. So again, I'm like you. It's a line I wouldn't touch. If you told me I had to pick a team to win this division today, right now, I'm picking the Lions because I think they have the least unknown. It would not shock me if 3 teams make the playoffs out of the NFC North, though.
I have 3 teams predicted to make the playoffs out of the NFC North. And I have them I have Green Bay and Detroit both at 11 wins when I went through it. Green Bay got the nod for whatever reason with the playoff predictor. The tiebreakers. The playoff predictors website, by the way, is a nerdy website out there for people who want to go through and pick all the games and see what your schedule or see what your what every record looks like for you. You can do it for college football as well. I'm a super nerd, so I like doing that stuff. But I ended with the Packers at 11 wins, the Lions at 11 wins, and the Bears at 10 wins. So I totally agree with you. These are 3 playoff teams, in my opinion. And the only reason that I think you mentioned the Lions didn't lose a lot, they have Ben Johnson, they have Aaron Glenn coming back. That, obviously, pretty much all the stars, all the young guys are back. And I think we were both really impressed when we went through our expansion kind of draft program that we do, where we protect 4 guys on each side of the ball and then a wild card for each team. We were both impressed with the Lions roster with who do we throw back. And we felt like no matter what, we were throwing back a really quality player. But the problem with that is I think every other team in their division is going to be better than they were last year, or at least the Vikings will be better than they were for the last 3 quarters of the year without Kirk Cousins. So each team is going to be better than they were that last year. And I don't know if Detroit is that much better or if they're kind of the same. And I think kind of the same will naturally lead to them regressing just a little bit because of how much better the rest of their division is. So I'm going with 11 wins. They could very easily win 12 and win this division. I would not be surprised. They have so much talent, so much young talent too. So regardless of what I think of Detroit this year, I think they're a near lock to make the playoffs. I have them making it at 11 wins. This is a team that will be around as a contender, I think, for the foreseeable future with the amount of young talent they have. And for as long as Jared Goff allows, if there becomes a time where the quarterback becomes more of a problem because they don't have as much talent around him, maybe then they won't be a contender. But I think it's not like he's going to get old anytime soon. I think he'll probably be the same guy he's been. So I think the Lions will be here in this conversation for a long time.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's go on to the upstart team in the division. It's the Green Bay Packers. And you mentioned them. We talked about them a lot last season. Last year when we did this, I picked them to win this division. And that looked really stupid the first half of the year when they were dreadful. And then when they came on, man, they were fun to watch. But they end their season 9-8. They beat Dallas 48-32 on Wild Card weekend before losing narrowly to the 49ers 24-21. And obviously the tail of the second half of the season was the emergence of Jordan Love, the guy who now has the highest quarterback contract in the NFL as of a couple of days ago. And we'll talk more about him in the offense in a minute. But so that you look at their losses, they lose David Bakhtiari, who was sort of a part-time player for them, given his health at this point in his career. You lose Devondre Campbell, Aaron Jones, John Runyon, and Darnell Savage. But then they added Josh Jacobs, Xavier McKinney, and then in the draft, Jordan Morgan and Edgerrin Cooper. My big question for this team is, can the offense pick up where it left off last season? And they were the youngest team to make the playoffs. And from week 12 on, they ranked second in EPA per play. Can they continue that? Like, young players, we like to think about development, but development is not linear. And just because the offense played at that level in the back half of last season doesn't mean they'll pick up where they left off last year. And so that's the key question. They bring in Josh Jacobs, who had a less than stellar, shall we say, 2023. In 2022, he leads the league in rushing yards, but in 2023, he had less than half of his yardage total from the year before and only 3.5 yards per carry with the Raiders. And so there's a lot of question marks still, I think, about the offense. I don't think anybody on the offense has proven themselves long-term obviously you're gambling on the Jordan Love contract because that's the cost of doing business. But you look at the receivers, there's a lot of potential. There's not like a surefire 1A alpha dog guy. So what are your thoughts about this offense, about the team as a whole as they head into this season?
They have a little bit of the Jacksonville Jaguars syndrome where it's like a lot of fine players on offense, but no one that gets you really excited outside of the quarterback. I think Love's better than Lawrence as of right now, but it feels like you look at the Packers roster on offense and the Jags roster on offense from running back to receiver to tight end to O-line, and you're kind of like, yeah, these are probably all starters, but you're not really excited about any of it. What I'd say is the reason for how optimistic I am about the Packers. I think they have the best coach in this division. I think LaFleur showed how good of a coach he was down the stretch last year when he really got going with Jordan Love. I think that despite not having the guy at wide receiver, they have a lot of options. They have Jaden Reed, who I'm really high on, really stepped into a nice role. Dontavion Wicks, who is their number 3 wide receiver. He actually finished as the number 26 receiver, according to PFF last year. Romeo Doubs is like their number 4 receiver. He's pretty solid, I think. Christian Watson is the interesting one, and he's the guy with the upside, probably. Like Jaden Reed's probably their guy that they're going to rely on the most. But if Christian Watson pops, he's got the physical tools to be a true wide receiver 1. And if he's able to stay healthy and he's able to reach the upside that they drafted him for a couple of years ago, then I think maybe Christian Watson is the guy who kind of levels this offense up. But I think Jordan Love's just going to level this offense up by himself because I think he's a truly elite quarterback. I think he's on that top 5 to 7 path, and I think he's just going to continue to get better. And the reason outside of Jordan Love, because there has to be a reason outside of just the quarterback and the head coach, outside of the surface level, they did replace their defensive coordinator. Was it Joe Barry? Joe Barry, I think. Joe Barry. I don't know why I was thinking Joel Barry, but Joe Barry. They got rid of him, and they replaced him with Jeff Hafley, who was the Boston College head coach, which is an interesting move. I can't pretend like I know a ton about what he's planning to do scheme-wise defensively, but I think any breath of fresh air there is probably a good idea because they hadn't been good on defense in a very long time, and he had been there for a long time. They've got a lot of names, and one guy that I wanted to talk about with the Giants and kind of zoomed by and forgot, because a lot of focus has been paid to the Giants losing their best offensive player in Saquon Barkley. I think you could make a case that the Giants lost their best defensive player and the best player on their roster, because I think he's a better player than Saquon is, in Xavier McKinney. Obviously, a lot of Eagles fans wanted Saquon from the Giants, and he was the Giant they were focused on. The Giant I was focused on the Eagles wanting to sign was Xavier McKinney, and the Packers, we were apparently in on it until the very last minute, and the Packers beat us with a huge offer. He's now the highest paid safety in the NFL, and by the way, I think that's deserved. I think he's one of the 3 to 4 best safeties in the league, and I think that gives them now their best player on defense, even better than Jair Alexander, even better than a lot of the other guys on their defense. I think are just very good to solid, like Rashawn Gary, really solid. Preston Smith, really solid. Lucas Van Ness, I think, is developing into a solid player. Devontae Wyatt, same. Kenny Clark's very good, so that's another very good guy. I think there's a chance this defense, I don't know enough about Hafley to make this prediction. I think there's a chance this defense is a lot better than we think.
Yeah, they should be under Hafley, moving from an odd front defense to an even front defense. So we'll see if that goes smoothly. They have the 19th easiest strength of schedule. Their over-under is at 10.5. And as Brandon chimes in on YouTube and says, go Packers. Unfortunately, I've got to break Brandon's heart and say I would slightly lean the under here. I still like the Packers. It's just hard for me off of that half a season to think they'll continue that pace. I think they're maybe primed for just a small step back. I think a small step back would be enough in a division that's as tough as this one. So I think the Packers are making the playoff. I do have them as a wild card team out of this division, though, not as the division winner.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all. But I have them at the same win total as Detroit, but eking out the division.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to the Minnesota Vikings, who went 7-10 last season. Obviously missed the playoffs. In the offseason, they lost Kirk Cousins. They lose Marcus Davenport, Jordan Hicks, Danielle Hunter, and KJ Osborne. They also added Blake Cashman, Sam Darnold, Jonathan Greenard, Shaq Griffin, Aaron Jones. And then in the draft, they add 2 first-round picks in J.J. McCarthy and Dallas Turner. The only big question for this team is, when will J.J. McCarthy be ready? Jeremy Fowler of ESPN reported, quote, Sam Darnold is considered the heavy favorite. My sense is McCarthy would have to be absolutely all-world to win this job, but he will play eventually. And then he went on to say the Vikings are low-key excited about Sam Darnold, the veteran. I think anytime you're low-key excited about Sam Darnold, that's not good. That doesn't speak well of your chances. I think they have a week 5 bye, so maybe you see J.J. McCarthy week 6. Maybe you start 0-3 and you see J.J. McCarthy sooner, but this whole season is about J.J. McCarthy and justifying the investment into him, seeing him develop under Kevin O'Connell. And then, if you want to flip over to the defensive side of the ball, Brian Flores is a fun guy to watch, man. What can he cook up in year two as the Vikings defensive coordinator? Last year, he led the NFL in max blitz rate and max coverage rate, and he would pretty much rush 6 or rush 3 every play, and it gave teams fits. What's his counterpunch going to be this year? What's he going to cook up? They do have a very difficult schedule, the 28th easiest schedule. Their over/under prediction is at 6.5. What are your thoughts on the Vikings?
Yeah, this is another one that I wouldn't touch. I have them at 7 wins. You could convince me to 5 or 6. You could convince me to 8. I just think Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, eventually TJ Hawkinson, Aaron Jones, a fine running back. I think that it's going to be hard for whatever quarterback they play to look too bad. I'm not a Sam Darnold guy, and I'm not a JJ McCarthy guy, but I do think Kevin O'Connell is one of the best coaches in the NFL, at least on the offensive side of the ball. So not too much to say on the Vikings, to be honest, outside of just wait and see on quarterback. What I will say is Justin Jefferson should be the third player off the board in fantasy football. Look at how he did at the end of last year with Nick Mullins. Man, he's quarterback proof. So I think Justin Jefferson's going to give you a lot of points in fantasy, no matter who is playing quarterback, Darnold or JJ.
Yeah, I agree with that. And as we move on to the Bears here, Brandon chimes in and says the Bears will do better than the Vikings in wins. That's something I absolutely agree with. I think
Definitely.
you agree with as well.
Did you go under the 6.5?
This isn't one I would touch, but if you make me pick it, I'll take under 6.5. I think that you talk about Sam Darnold and I'm out. Yes. I wasn't the biggest JJ McCarthy guy either, and I'm always scared. Pretty much I don't want to touch over-unders for teams with rookie quarterbacks because you just never know what you're going to get. But yeah, I would probably take that under as well. So moving on to the Bears, who also went 7-10 last offseason. Or last season. They really only lost Darnell Mooney. I mean, they lost Justin Fields, but that doesn't matter. But they added a lot this offseason. They added Keenan Allen. They get Kevin Byard, DeAndre Swift, Jalen Johnson, and then the duo of Caleb Williams and Rome Odunze. They get another guy that we liked on day 2 in Kyron Amagaji, the tackle out of Yale. My big question for the Bears, and this tells you where I'm at with the Bears, but will Caleb Williams become the first 4,000-yard passer in Bears history as a rookie? The current record was set by Eric Kramer in 1995 at 3,838. I legitimately think that Caleb Williams has a good shot to go be a 4,000-yard passer as a rookie. He's got a better supporting cast than Justin Fields ever had. He's got a better offensive coordinator in Shane Waldron versus Luke Getsy that Justin Fields had. I'm very optimistic about this Bears offense. What are your thoughts on the Bears heading into 2024?
Yeah, I mean, it'd be hard not to be optimistic about this Bears offense. I am extremely high on Caleb Williams. I think he's a generational talent. I think he's a special quarterback prospect, so I think it's going to be really good right away. I think this Bears roster is probably an 8 or 9 win roster that I think an elite quarterback takes to being a 10, 11 win roster. I think they're going to make the playoffs. They're minus money to make the playoffs right now, depending on the sports book you're looking at. And one of my biggest, fantasy takes in this entire year, and I feel like I've let Dibes down with dynasty things. I will say Rome Odunze was my number 3 overall player for this season. He's a guy that it's tricky because some of the other top rookies this year, that if you're doing a rookie dynasty draft, you're doing a first round, Rome Odunze probably won't give you as much this year as some of those other top guys will, because Neighbors, Marvin Harrison Jr., these guys are going into situations where they're the guy. And Rome Odunze is going into a situation you have Keenan Allen and DJ Moore. But Odunze would be a guy I'd be interested in long term. I think he's going to turn into a superstar in this league. But the problem is, I think the best receiver in this receiver room is still Keenan Allen. I don't think people realize how good Keenan Allen still is. Last year, he had 108 catches for 1,243 yards and 7 touchdowns. They asked him why he didn't take a pay cut to stay in LA since they know he played his whole career with the Chargers. He said, I had my best season and I did it in 13 games. He's like, and I did it with my backup quarterback for half the time. Like, I don't think people realize how insane last year was from Keenan Allen. 108 catches on 150 targets in 13 games is pretty nuts. He was like a top 5 receiver in fantasy per game. I think he's going to step in and be one of the values of fantasy football season. He's going around 81, so somewhere around, depending if it's a 7-8 team league, a 7th, 8th rounder. I think he's going to produce like a 3rd or a 4th rounder, like a top 25, top 20 receiver. So I love Keenan Allen. I've always thought he's been an underrated top receiver. DJ Moore, I haven't always been the biggest DJ Moore guy, but he's unquestionably a top 20, 25 guy. And I think Rome Odunze steps in as, I think, immediately a top 40-ish guy. You have Cole Kmet at tight end, who's at least a body who's serviceable. DeAndre Swift, I think, has really limited upside on what he is at this point, but is a competent guy you can use out of the backfield. You can use in terms of passing him the ball as well. It's going to come down, I think, a lot to how good this team is to Eberflus and the defense. And Eberflus down the stretch last year did a good job. I wouldn't say he's necessarily a ball of charisma in the press conference room at Eberflus. If you watch those, it doesn't inspire confidence. But I would say this whole season, whether or not they're a fringe playoff exciting team or whether or not they can vault into crazy conversations right away, maybe, comes down to whether or not that defense can be what it was down last year's stretch.
Yeah, 6 of the last 7 seasons, Keenan Allen has had 990 yards or better. And the one he didn't was 2022 when he missed 6 games with injury. So still a very good player. And yeah, my other question is about the defense. You know, can the defense take a step forward? That's not something they invested in much this offseason, but it did get better down the stretch with Montez Sweat last year. They have the 3rd easiest schedule. The over-under is set at 8.5. And this is one I'll take the over because, like I said, I have them in the playoffs. So I think we're both on board with the Bears in the playoffs. So that gives us 3 NFC North playoff teams. That only leaves 1 wild card spot left. And to me, I go back and forth on whether that wild card spot's going to belong to the NFC East or West. And yeah, I had a feeling you were going to go with the South when you said I wouldn't predict where you were going to go. So that last one's up in the air, but that is going to about do it for this NFC East and North preview to our new listeners on the Eagles Pinpoll Network. Hope you enjoyed the show. This is what you can expect from us for the next couple of weeks. And when we get into the season, like we said, we'll be coming on Monday with NFC East updates from their games over the weekend and some other top games that we'll talk about each week. But Mark, before we get out of here, do you have any final thoughts or takes you want to fire off?
Any final thoughts? Okay, I got a final thought. It's a fantasy. I feel like I've been a heavy fantasy show for me, but I don't know if you know this, Shane. We're 2 days away from what I like to officially call the national month of fantasy draft awareness, because August is the month that everyone's doing their fantasy drafts. Everyone's getting their cramming for their research done. And I'm just here to help people who are willing to do it 2 days ahead in July. So I unleashed the take the other day when on my radio show. There is a way that you can guarantee that you will not win your fantasy league this year. It is if you do not get one of CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, Tyreek Hill, Amon-Ra St. Brown, A.J. Brown, Jamar Chase, Devontae Adams, Puka Nacua, Marvin Harrison Jr., or Garrett Wilson. Because after the top 10 fantasy receivers, I think there is a massive, massive drop-off to Chris Olave, Mike Evans, Drake London, Nico Collins. I think that's a really, really big drop-off. So there's 10 receivers that I think can finish as wide receiver 1. There's going to be 12 teams in your league. Don't be one of those 2 teams that doesn't have someone who can finish as wide receiver 1 in the entire NFL. So my take is do whatever it takes to get one of those 10 wide receivers on your fantasy team.
There you go. Wide receivers matter. You heard it here first. Thank you guys for joining us for episode number 163 of Chalk Talk. If you enjoy what you heard on the show, and we know that you do, smash that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next episode. Drop us a 5-star rating wherever you stream your podcasts. You can follow us on Twitter. I'm at Shane Half NFL. He is at Mark Henry Jr., and we will catch you guys next time.